And we're live. Hello, everybody. Hope we're all having a wonderful day today. Today is so exciting. Good morning. Hello. Look at all these wonderful comments. Morning. Ah. Hello, Team Pat Pat. People love the Pat Pat. I love it too. It makes me so happy. Hello to Bangladesh. So good to be here with everybody once again. Welcome to another iteration, another lesson of the Free JavaScript Bootcamp. Happy coding. Yeah, wonderful. Let's do a little bit more. So today we're going to be continuing with ES6. If you missed yesterday's lesson, don't worry. Remember that all of these lessons are being put up on YouTube and they're going to be saved there so you can go back at any time. Hello from China. Hi. Hello from Kenya. Hello. Love to see everybody coming in today. Hello from Montreal under heavy snow. My goodness, it is not snowed here in Austria very much. We had a bit of a white end of year, but not much. From Las Vegas, hello. From Brazil, wonderful, wonderful. Love to see everybody come in today. And yeah, let's continue with ES6. Just to catch you up, if you missed yesterday's lesson and didn't catch up yet, don't stress. Again, this is all going to be on Free Code Camp. Yes, on YouTube for you to follow along. And just to catch you up on what we did yesterday, we started with ES6. You can see here we're at lesson 14 out of 29. And the homework, which again, I hope I emphasize this well, it was not mandatory to finish it by today, was to do the rest of the JavaScript basics lessons. So we didn't finish all of these live together, but all good. Just do them when you can. And always, always, please ask for help, ask questions at the forums and the Discord. The link will go up just in a bit from my wonderful assistant. And what was I going to say? And yeah, we will continue with ES6 today. We'll get as far as we can. And the objective is to finish ES6. If we don't make it, the rest will be homework. So let's get right to it. So we're at lesson 14 out of 29. And as always, folks, I'm going to go through these, explain them the best that I can. And if you have any questions, please save them for the end and we'll do a Q&A session at the end. So let's start with create strings using template literals. That's going to be our first lesson today. And in order to do that, we're going to talk about a new way to make strings. So actually what I'm going to do, if I may, is just delete all of the code here. I'm going to select all of it and delete it right away, leaving us with an empty piece of code here. And let's talk a little bit about making strings, especially making strings with variables in them. Let's make an object called my dog. And this will be a dog named, let's call him something with G, Gustavo. If I could spell, Gustavo. Legs will be 4 and tails will be 1 tail. So let's say we wanted to print out a string that says, my dog is called name. He is 4 years old and has 1 tail. Let's do that. Let's do that doing the old way. Console log. My dog is called, then a space, plus my dog.name. And there you can see I'm already building out my string. Now, this is one way to do it. You could keep adding strings. We've done this in previous lessons. He is, and then plus my dog dot. Oh, sorry. He has. Legs. Legs. Let's keep it at that. My dog is called Gustavo. He has 4 legs. Cool. But what we're going to be learning today is an easier way to be able to interpolate values into our strings. And this is where string template literals come in. So we're going to do the same thing, but let me just, let's console log a new string. And to do it this time, we're going to introduce a new way to make strings, which is with the template literal, which is the backtick. It kind of looks like it's not the same as an apostrophe. It's a little, I've got it at the left side of my keyboard. It looks like a slanted apostrophe. See if you can find it. Anyway, otherwise you can copy it over from the instructions. Either way, whichever works for you. So Let's try this the new way. My dog is called, and here is where the magic of template literals come in. We can use the $ and curly brackets to insert a value right in there. My dog.name. He has $ curlies. My dog.legs, legs. So, believe it or not, let me just remove this. Believe it or not, both 7 and 10 will evaluate to the same thing. Just take a quick moment for water. All right. So these are both the same ways to add values into a larger string. But check out how nice this is. This is just building one string, and every time we need a value, and this can be any kind of value, just like with line 7. For example, let's have, it doesn't have to be a variable. It can be any kind of expression in JavaScript. So 2 plus 5 minus 6. 4. Yeah, 3. There we go. So, sorry, not a good day to be doing math. So we can evaluate any kind of expression inside this $ and curly brackets to be able to give us that value that we want. So that's that. Now let's take a look at our exercise. Just going to refresh my page here and see what we've got. We've got an object here with result, success, which is an array made up of 3 strings, failure, which is made up of 3 strings, and skipped, which is made up of 3 strings. We've got a function called makeList, which takes an array, and we've got failure items in here, and we're going to return those failure items. And then we're going to set a variable called failure list to be the return value of the makeList function with result.failure, which we know to be this array here. So we're going to be passing this array into this function. And as always, let's console log failures list. Right now, that's an empty array. Let's scroll down and see what our assignment is here. So use the template literal syntax with backticks to create an array of list element li strings. Each list element's text should be one of the array elements from the failure property on the result object and have a class attribute with the value text warning. The makeList function should return the array of list item strings. Use an iterator method, any kind of loop, to get the desired output shown below. So this is what it should look like. And I can see here, if you've done the HTML, the web development bootcamp, this should feel right at home. And if not, don't worry, we'll get through this together. So we've got, let's see, a list element. So this is using our bigger than and smaller than. These are called tags in HTML. If you're not familiar with HTML, again, don't worry. I highly recommend my buddy Jess's web development bootcamp. It is delightful, and you will learn so much. And she's an excellent teacher. Anyway, so this is a list element that closes off here, and inside is going to be the value of these 3 of each member of this array. So far, so good. Let's loop through the array. Now, if you all remember how to do a loop, we did that yesterday. We'll have a for, we'll have a let I equals 0. Then I will need to be smaller than r.length. And what happens each loop? We will increase I by 1. Then we're going to push into our failure items one of these strings. Let's do just that. So failure items dot push. Then let's push that string in. And here we're going to be using our template literal right away. So again, backticks. And so we'll write all of this HTML by hand first. So li, whoopsie daisy. There we go. Li with a class is equals to text warning. I'm just really copying this over. Inside that tag, however, let me just put that closing side in. So what I've done here is written one of these, but without the content inside here. Because inside there, that's where we're going to put our inline value. So we're going to use the $ and curly brackets, and inside here is going to be the element in the index of the array. So we're going to go R square brackets I, and look at that. By just pushing and console logging, we've already got all three. Var on top and line break. So what we've done is just created an array of 3 elements, each of which has these contents. And by using string template literals, we don't have to worry about where the spaces go when adding in. We're not adding strings together. We're just doing it in one single string. Cool. So that's console logged. We've got a result that looks identical. So I don't know about the rest of y'all, but I think we can run the tests. And there we go. Pat, pat. Cool. On to the next one. So next, we're going to be doing an exercise called Write Concise Object Literal Declarations using Object Property Shorthand. Now, this is a mouthful of a title, let me tell you. But let me go over what it means. What we're doing here is essentially using what's called literal declarations to be able to declare objects in a much more concise way. What we can do, for example, let's see, we're creating a person here. Let's call this function. Let's console log create person, and I see here it takes 3 parameters. So I'm going to go with Gabriel. So that's our name. Our age is 25, and the gender is male. So let's see what happens. It returns an object with name set to name, age set to age, and gender set to gender. And we can see there, name is Gabriel, age is 25, and gender is male. So what happens if we want to make this concise? Because it's kind of repetitive to go name, name. What ES6 allows us to do is just say, hey, just make it the same. Now, this is only going to work if both the key and the name of the variable we're passing in as the value have the same name. So this is just shorthand for name, name. Let's try it with another object. Let's go with, let me think. Gabriella, age 25 as well, gender female. And we can see here, name is Gabriella, age is 25, and gender is female. So that's how that works. If we want to add another one, let's add another one. Let's go with address. Ooh, that's a great suggestion. Thank you. So now we're adding another parameter to this function. So I'll just pass in this parameter here. Let's go with number 1 Main Street. Now, what we could do in order to add it to this object is say address : address. Or if we want to use object literal declarations, all we got to do is just pass in address. Again, this is only going to work if you want this and the key to have the same name. So that's how that works. Let's look at so use object property shorthand with object literals to create and return an object with name, age, and gender. So let's remove the address real quick. And remember, folks, if you've got questions if you've got questions, please, we'll do a Q&A at the end, and we'll make sure that everybody gets at least as many of you be able to ask your questions as possible. So this looks good. Let's run our code and see what happens. Fingers crossed. Yep. Pat, pat. Nice. Now, what have we got next? Excuse me. So when defining functions, we're going to be writing concise declarative functions, because what we can do here is, in case it wasn't clear, an object can have any kind of property, any type of property, which, yes, can include functions. So for example, this object bicycle has a property that's called setGear, which is a function. Now, what it does is it sets this dot gear to be set to new gear. And this is a new keyword we're looking at, folks. This is called this. And what it does is it says, hey, look at this object I'm inside right now, which is bicycle. And look at this object bicycle, take a look at its property gear. We see, okay, that has a value of 2. What we're doing is take it from this object and set it to be whatever value this is. So let's see what's happening here. So bicycle.setGear is set to 3 and console.log bicycle.gear. And we can see now that by calling the function setGear to 3, it's now set to 3. So anytime we want to, let me console log before and after bicycle.gear. So before calling this function inside the object, it was 2. After calling this, it's 3. And that's how that works. So let's take a look at what we can do here with ES6. What we can do is, instead of saying setGear function new gear, instead of writing out the function, we can have what's called, what is it called? Concise declarative functions. So what we can do is say, replace that here and say, hey, oh, I left one bracket too many. Say, hey, this function called setGear takes a parameter and this is what it does. And you can see here, it does the exact same thing as it did before. Console.log bicycle.gear. Refactor the function setGear inside the object bicycle to use the shorthand syntax described above. And that's exactly what we've done. Let's have a look. Let's run our tests and pats, we did it. Nice, we're 59% of the way done through ES6. Folks, only if you can afford it and you want to contribute to Free Code Camp, it's a volunteer-led organization. They will highly appreciate any bit of money you can give. It's so nice of them to give us all of this free material. So next comes something that we actually came upon yesterday. We were looking at one of the exercises where we came upon the keyword new to describe a new date, for example. Before I look at any of this, let me just comment this out. Let's have a look at console log new date. Remember, we covered dates yesterday and we were like, why is there whoopsie, forgot my brackets, silly me. Why is there what is this keyword new and why is it surrounding something called date? And that's because date is what's called a class. And this is something introduced in ES6 that it's sort of a new and sort of more compressed way to create new objects. So let's take a look at what this is about. What we can do is declare a class. For example, let's take a look at what's happening in line 5 and 6. Const caret is equals to a new vegetable. And notice the vegetable has a capital V called caret. And console log caret.name is set to, it should display caret, but it doesn't do that yet because vegetable is not defined. And this is where the class keyword and construction comes in. So we can define something called a class. Notice class is with a lowercase c. And our class names will be an uppercase snake case. So that means that it's like snake case, except we've got a hump at the very beginning. So for example, if I have a name that's called poo, let's see, how about vegetable garden? You'll see both this one and this one are capitalized. Anyway, so we've got a class called vegetable, and inside here, we will define the parts of our vegetable class. And when we declare something new, what we're saying, hey, call up new something, we're actually calling up a function inside this class called constructor. Right? And this function can take any kind of parameters and therefore initialize this class. So I'm throwing out a lot of terms here. So let's take a step back. When we are calling new on a class, what we're doing is initializing an instance of that class. And when we do that, we get an object back. So this is just a way to be able to declare an object. What's cool about classes is that we can also give it a parameter to instantiate with. You can see here, new vegetable with carrot. And this is where the magic of the constructor function comes in. Here we can say, hey, when you make a new vegetable, we want to give it a name. So, and what we can do is then set that name on this object. And how do we do that? Like we saw last lesson or the lesson before, using this. This dot name is equals to name. Now that looks weird. These look the same, name and this dot name, but they're not quite the same. So what I like to do, for example, is go with new name and go with new name. Weddington asks, does every class have to be capital letter? Yes, this is called uppercase snake case. Hope that helps. Yeah, so we're going to say, hey, this constructor takes one parameter, which is called new name, and we'll set this dot name to be new name. So what this gives us is an object. Actually, instead of console logging carrot.name, let's go with carrot. And there we can see what this is. It's an object with one property, name.carrot. What if we want to have more properties on it? Well, we just define more parameters here. I love what Dwarf Horde is saying here. Class is like a blueprint, and the instance is the house that results from those blueprints. And that's actually a metaphor I really like, because it's kind of it's a blueprint or a recipe. It's sort of like sorry. Yeah, it's sort of like a template from which you build lots of different things. And you might be wondering, why not make lots of objects? And that's a good question. That's because if I want to make lots of vegetables, all I got to do is, instead of going with the brackets and the name colon and all that, all I got to make is potato, new vegetable, potato. Or if I want to make turnip, new vegetable, turnip. Now let's console log each of these and take a look. Potato is named potato. Turnip name is turnip. Now what's cool, and these don't have to have the exact name, huh? Vegetable instance, for example, carrot instance. This is a variable that holds that instance, right? So to be very clear, carrot instance is an instance of the vegetable class that has been passed carrot as a name. Potato is an instance of vegetable. Turnip is an instance of vegetable. However, I want to make this very clear. Potato is not the same as turnip. Let me remove this console log here. Is potato equals to turnip? No. And we know that because potato and turnip are different instances and they have different names. We went through a lot there. Let's take a look at our instructions here. Use a class keyword to write a constructor, which we did, to create the vegetable class. The vegetable class allows you to create a vegetable object with a property name that gets passed to the constructor, which we did here, new name, this dot name equals new name. So we've done that already. So in theory, we should be good to go. Let's have a look. Oh, whoopsie daisy. What I forgot to do here was rename this back to carrot. There we go. So be very clear with your variable names, folks. So the tests expect there to be, here we can, by the way, I haven't been doing this much in the lessons, but here you can see what is expected of you. Vegetable should be a class with a defined constructor method. The class here, carrot.name should return carrot. So that's my mistake. Let's run our tests. And there we go. Pat. Cool. Let's keep going. Awesome. Let me have a sip of water. Phew. Now, what are we doing here? Oh, this is going to be, let's have a look here. So another thing we can do inside these classes is define functions that are called getters and setters. Sounds weird, but you'll see what I mean in just a moment. Let's skip over these instructions and go straight to our exercise so we can figure this out on our own. So we will use the class keyword to create a thermostat class. Cool. The constructor accepts a Fahrenheit temperature. I think so far we know how to do that. So class thermostat. So we've defined a class called thermostat. And remember, it's got upper camel case. There you go, class thermostat. Next, we will define a function called constructor, and it's always called constructor. And it will take one parameter, which is a Fahrenheit temperature. So I will call this Fahrenheit. So this is a parameter called Fahrenheit, and it accepts a Fahrenheit temperature. So this dot temperature, this dot temp is equals to Fahrenheit. So what are we doing here? We're storing inside inside this thermostat class, we give it a Fahrenheit temperature and it stores it inside there. So far, so good. Next, we're going to define a getter to obtain the temperature in Celsius and a setter to set the temperature in Celsius. Now, we're going to go this one step at a time. First, let's see how we define a getter. Let's do that first. So we're going to call this get, and this property should be called temperature, right? And here, remember, what we want to do is return the temperature, but in Celsius. But given that we are storing this in Fahrenheit, we will need to return that and convert it to Celsius. Now, thankfully, the instructions here give us an idea of how to do that with math. So here's what we're going to do. So I see here that Celsius is equals to 5 divided by 9 times Fahrenheit minus 32. So we will return 5 divided by 9. Whew, okay. Times. Now, how do we get our temperature? We will do that with our local property, this dot temp. Minus 32. Now, before we do anything else, we're getting some errors because there's no setter. Let's ignore that for now. Let's see what we've done here. Line 13, we make a new thermostat with a Fahrenheit of 76. Then we're going to define a local variable called thermos.temperature. Thermos.temperature. Let's console log temp. Okay, so should be about 24.44 in Celsius, which we see here. It kind of is. It's just not rounded down to 2 decimal places, which is fine. It's a floating point number, so it can go infinitely. So that's how we do a getter, right? Next, we want to define a setter, I believe. Yes, and a setter to set the temperature in Celsius. So here, what we're going to have to do, let's set temperature temp Celsius. So it takes one parameter called temp Celsius. Now we're going to want to set our temperature, so this dot temp, to be the converted from Celsius to Fahrenheit. And thankfully, we've got that here as well. By the way, I made the cursor of my mouse bigger today. I hope that's better for everybody. If not, let me know in the chat, please. So temp Celsius times 9.0 divided by 5 plus 32. That is quite the mathematical formula, but let's make sure. C, which is temp Celsius, times 9.0 divided by 5 plus 32. Let's console log. We've done it here. Thermostat temperature is still 24.4. Well, we see what we do after that. Thermos.temperature. Oh, folks, I just saw. Sorry about that, Maxim. I just realized my cursor doesn't show up when I'm sharing my screen. I don't know why that is. I will see if I can get that sorted for the next lesson. But thank you very much for pointing that out. What was I doing? Yes. So we've set it here, thermos.temperature to be 26, and temp is equals to thermos.temperature. So let's console log that again. Console log temp. Here we can see the temperature is indeed 26. Oh, you do see a cursor. My bad. I don't know what my what it's doing. Anyway, sorry, folks. Where was I? Yes. So now we're logging that console log temp. So this looks good. Now, some folks are wondering, and this is a great question, what's the reason for having an underscore in the explanation? And as somebody pointed out in the chat, thank you very much, Florin, whenever you see a variable denoted underscore variable name, it's a way in which you say a property is private. So it's a naming convention. So in fact, as you correctly pointed out, I should actually be using the underscore here. Not that this changes anything. And in fact, if we console log temperature again, not a number. Oh, whoopsie. Forgot to do it here. My bad. There we go. Once we get that temperature, this is telling us that this is private. Meaning, what does it mean that to be private? It means that this property of the object really should only be used inside that object, not outside. But more on that later. Thank you for asking that. So we've done that. We've done getters and setters. Let's see if we can run our tests and see how it goes. And there we go. Pat, we are 66% of the way done through ES6. Good job, everybody. Great. So next, we're actually going to be looking a little bit our, I think somebody says here correctly. I think private variables are denoted by a hashtag, if I'm correct. I'm actually not sure. Thank you for that. Let's investigate that more during Q&A. So it's time for modules. What are modules? What we're looking at here is actually some HTML code. So this is our first exercise where we're not writing JavaScript. We're writing a little bit of HTML. So if you're not familiar with HTML, we've got HTML and body. So these are two opening tags, and down here, body and HTML are being closed. So what we're going to be doing here is importing a JavaScript module into our HTML code. And what we can do is do script. If you've done a little bit of HTML, this will seem super familiar. But what we're doing is importing. So type equals module. SRC is equals to, let's see, add a script to the HTML document of type module, which we've got here, and give it the source file of index.js. So the SRC, we're going to go index.js. Cool. And then, of course, we need to close that script tag. What we're doing here is saying to the HTML, hey, please import the contents of that. Please bring in the contents of that JavaScript file. And this is the file here. It's called index.js. JS is a good way, if you don't work with a lot of files, JS is a good way to tell you this file contains JavaScript code. So script of type module with the source name of index.js, close our close our script tag. And actually, that should be everything we need to do in this module. Let's take a look. Yep, pat. Nice, let's keep going. Awesome. So when we're importing the contents of a JavaScript file, we also need to be able to tell a JavaScript file that imports our JavaScript file. JavaScript files can import and export each other, right? So let's say if I don't want to reuse the contents of my JavaScript and instead have them in one file, but I want to use a function from that file in another JavaScript file. These can sort of, for example, what we see here, let's have a look at our code here. We've got two functions. Uppercase string, which takes a string, will return string dot to uppercase. Let's try that out real quick. Console log uppercase string with a value of hello JavaScripters. So now you can see string dot to uppercase. What it does is it puts all of the letters in capital in uppercase. So it's like screaming, hello JavaScripters. Awesome. Cool. So that's hello JavaScripters in all caps. Let's try it now with lowercase string. So instead of uppercase, we're going to try this with lowercase string. Now you can see it's all in small letters, which is kind of like whispering, isn't it? Hello, JavaScripters. Awesome. And let's say these two functions are declared in a single file called, let's say, stringfunctions.js, right? What if we want to be able to use them in a different JavaScript file? Well, what we can do is export those functions. And to do that, all we need to do is add the export part here at the front. Export. Now, our code won't change. What our code does will not change to us immediately inside this file. We can still call lowercase string. We can still call uppercase string. Let me just try that out again. Huh. Did I do something wrong? Uppercase. Huh. That's odd. Maybe I'm wrong. Our code did change. Lowercase string. I guess it did. Sorry about that, folks. Sometimes I can be wrong. Cool. Well, okay. So what we're doing is saying, hey, if you import string functions.js from anywhere, you can now use these two functions if you want. And we'll see what that means in just a moment, because the next exercise is going to cover that. So when you export a variable or function, you can import it in another file. So, aha, here's another way to export those functions. Let's do that. That actually sounds better. So we can export, uppercase string, comma, lowercase string. By doing this, we're doing what I meant. So exporting from that one, inside that one object, we're saying, hey, please export uppercase string and lowercase string. And yes, this is with the curly brackets. As Weddington says, do I need to write export everywhere, or can be done by writing only one at a time? You can totally do it by writing one at a time. My mistake. So, and somebody's asking very correctly, export it where? We're going to be exporting it so that it's available to us in any other file that imports the contents of this file here. You're going to see what I mean in the next exercise. So let's do that. Export both of them using the method of your choice. Let's run the tests. And there we go. Pat, pat. And now let's import those. So here we want to use the functions from the last exercise, uppercase string and lowercase string. And we're getting an error here, reference error. Uppercase string is not defined. That's because we have a fresh JavaScript file here, but nowhere to import them from. So what we want to do is, let's see our exercise here. Add the appropriate import statement that will allow the current file to use uppercase string and lowercase string. You exported in the previous lessons. These functions are in a file called string_functions.js. So let's do just that. We want to use the import keyword, and then with the curly brackets just before, uppercase string and lowercase string. And then we need to use a keyword from, and then the file. Stringfunctions.js. Now you'll see, now nothing's happening. Before we take a look at what's happening here. Let's investigate this real quick. What's this? What's going on here? We've got a dot and a forward slash. What we're telling JavaScript here is, hey, this file string underscore functions.js is in the same folder where this file is. So let's say this file here, the contents we've got here, this is called, I don't know, printer.js, right? We're saying string functions.js is in the same folder. You know how you have folders in Finder or in Windows Explorer, I think it's called, or whatever operating system you're using. It's in the same folder. So that's what this dot and this forward slash mean. So is this working? Let's give it a console log and see. Console log uppercase string hello. I guess they don't really return a string. That's odd, isn't it? My bad. But the fact that it's not giving an error does tell me that it is, in fact, importing that correctly. So let's run the tests and see if that works. There we go. Pat, pat. Let's keep going. Awesome. Got a good question here that I'm going to highlight. Would you have to type this at the top of the code? Yes, absolutely. Thank you for your question. So let's say, okay, what if we wanted to import everything into one chunk, into one object? See, here we've got something called string functions dot uppercase string. So what we can do is using the star. So import star, and star in this case doesn't actually mean multiplication. It means everything. So import everything as, and now we can give this the wrapper that will put that in. String functions from, and then string underscore functions.js. And you'll see now we're going into, let's console log string functions and see what we've got inside here. That's odd. My console log doesn't seem to be working here. Maybe, I think it might be because of the way this is defined. Sorry about that, folks. Normally, you should be able to see those contents in there. So string functions.uppercase string should work. And Maria asks, can't you also omit the dot forward slash? I think so, but it's a good idea to do it just in case. Next, is this everything within the export or in the other file? And yes, it's everything inside the export. So everything that gets exported from there gets put into string functions. Whew. I'm more familiar with compiled languages. Will import block the thread until it's finished? That's a great question, and I don't know that off the top of my head. I'll investigate that in the Q&A section afterwards. Do keep those questions coming, please. So this is being imported into a local variable called string functions. So it's all stored inside there. Whew. All right, so let's take a look at our exercise. The code in this file requires the contents of the file string functions.js. That is the same directory as the current file. Use the import star as to import everything from the file into an object called string functions. So that's going to store everything in string functions. So it looks like we've done that here. Let's run the tests. Thank you, Anthony. JavaScript is single-threaded, so it will block. Whew, so there we go. Pat, pat. Let's keep going. Awesome. Okay, now, what if we want to export only one thing from a file? What we can do is either say export, and inside that object, subtract, and that, so we've got a function here called subtract, returns x minus y. We can export an object containing the subtract function. But what if we don't want to really wrap it in an object? What if we want to export just that? That's where export default is going to come in. And what we can do is say, instead of function subtract, we can say export default function subtract. And that's really all we're doing here, so that when we import it in another file, it'll look something like this. Imagine this is another file below this line. We will import subtract from math functions.js. So by exporting default, we don't need to worry about the star. We just know, hey, export this, and I can import just this. It looks a little bit different, but what it's meant to do is just let a single file have one thing inside it that we export. So again, this is export default is for exporting one thing at a time. So you can only have one export default. Let's take a look at our exercise. The following function should be the fallback value for the module. So since export default is used to declare a fallback value for the module or file, you can only have one value be a default export. Additionally, you cannot export default with var, let, or const. So yes, export default function. Notice we're not doing anything with var, let, or const. It's really just, hey, export this. Let's run our test and see how it looks. Nice. Pat, pat. Let's keep going. Doing great. Great. So here we can import a default export. This is what I showed you last lesson. So in the following code, import the default export from the math functions.js file found in the same directory as this file. Give the import the name subtract. So import subtract from, and which file? Math functions. From math_functions.js. Phew, there we go. So math_functions.js, and we can now use subtract. And let's see if I can console log it now. I don't know why that wasn't working before. Sometimes things just mysteriously don't work. I think it's because of the way this test is set up. But let's console log something else and make sure that console log isn't broken or something. Yeah, something about console log doesn't seem to be working in these exercises. That's really odd. Sorry about that. So there we go. So we're importing subtract from math_functions, and we're subtracting 7 from 4. Perfect. Let's run our tests. Yes, pat, pat. Okay, now here comes a little bit of what we were talking about before. Somebody was asking questions about single-threaded and multi-threaded. This is called doing things synchronously or asynchronously. And I'll show you what I mean in just a second. Why do we need to think about something being synchronous or asynchronous? Before we look at the exercise, let's talk about that a little bit. You see, what I can do in JavaScript for a lot of applications is make an internet connection to another server and say, hey, can you give me the weather for today? Then the connection will go off, connect to the server, pass on the request to the server. The server will then reply and say, hey, the weather today is, well, it's nighttime here, so it's a bit cloudy. It's cloudy, right? So the weather is cloudy, and that's called making a net request, an internet request, a web request, right? Now, if it's synchronous, that means that I'm going to send off that request and just wait. So let's say we have a function called make request, right? Make requests, let's say const weather equals make request Vienna. That's where I am, right? Let's just imagine that there's a function that does that request that takes a string called Vienna. Let's not worry about what that function does just yet. Let's just pretend that it sends off a request for the weather. And then I want to console log that weather. Make request is not defined. Let's not worry about that. Let's look at our code for a second and say, all right, should my code wait until this request is done? That's called a synchronous request. But what could also happen, let's say if I have low connectivity, let's say, the internet connection is bad, maybe it makes more sense if this is an asynchronous request. That means it happens in the background. What that means is that I make this request and then the code keeps running. And you might be wondering, well, if the connection's not done yet, won't this data not have the weather report in it? And it does. And that's true. This is where the concept of dealing with synchronicity or asynchronicity comes in. So something being synchronous waits until something's done and then keeps going. Something being asynchronous means that it sends off the request and just keeps going. That's where promises come in. Now, this is going to be a bit tricky, folks. So I'm going to describe it as best as I can today. Then I'm going to ask you that A, we do these exercises together, and B, I would recommend taking a look at the Get Help and take a look at hints there. I'm going to see if I can find some articles from Free Code Camp about promises, because this is going to be the most challenging part of ES6, in my opinion. Right? So what we're saying is, hey, make something asynchronously and promise me that when you're done, we'll keep going. So we can define a promise by doing this. We'll have a const called, let's go with, create a new promise called make server request. Make server request, right? And this will be a new promise. Now remember what we learned last time. New tells us that we're instantiating a class. So promise is a class, and the constructor will take inside it an arrow function. So the parameter is going to be an arrow function. So like making before, arrow and curly brackets. Sorry, I pressed enter too early. So the parameter of this new promise is an arrow function. Next, I'm just going to split this over 2 lines, put a semicolon here. So we've made a new promise, and the constructor takes a function as a parameter, and that function, kind of a function inside a function here, a function inside a parameter here, will take 2 parameters. These are called resolve and reject. This is how we conventionally create a promise. Right? Now, let's not worry yet about what resolve and reject do. We're going to learn that in the next exercise. We're just taking a look here at how to define a promise. So how to declare a promise. So we make a new promise, and that constructor takes 1 parameter, which is an arrow function made up of 2 parameters itself called resolve and reject. They don't have to be called resolve and reject. That's just the convention. Phew. So our exercise is to just create this. Let's see if that works. And it does. Pat, pat. Almost there, folks. All right. Let's take a look at resolve. Let's take a look at our promise here. Now this arrow function inside the promise is a little bit chunkier. Let's see what we've got here. Response from server represents a response from the server, and let's give it a value just for fun. Okay, let response from server be set to true. If response from server, we'll need to change this line, else we'll need to change this line. And this is where resolve and reject come in. So if something is successful, then we want to call the resolve function. If something is unsuccessful, then we want to call the reject parameter. And these are functions. So make the promise handle success and failure. If the response from server is true, call the resolve method to successfully complete the promise. Let's do that. Resolve. Done. Pass resolve a string with the value we got the data. Okay, so it takes 1 parameter, which is a string that has the contents we got the data. Cool. If response from server is false, use the reject method instead and pass it the string data not received. Reject data not received. So what we're doing here is building an example of a promise. And this promise, all it's doing is indicating, hey, do this if it's successful, or do that if it's unsuccessful. We don't know yet what these functions do. We're just saying, hey, whatever you want to do with this, this is the one to be run if it's successful. This is the one to be run if it's unsuccessful. Whew. Okay, so, oh, and here's something to bear in mind. The example above, what we're doing here, uses strings, but it can be whatever we want. It can be a number, it can be a Boolean, it can be an object if we want. We're passing a string in the resolve and reject. Okay, let's keep going with promises, and I can't promise myself, but I hope that it'll get better with time. So, good to go. 93% done with ES6. Pat, pat. Let's submit and go to the next challenge. So now we've got our promise just like before. We've got our promise with response from server is set to true to represent a successful response from a server. So let response from server be set to true. If response from server, which is true, then it'll resolve, we got the data, else reject, data not received. This looks like just like we were doing last time. But now we're going to call that promise. And that's where then comes in. You see, we're storing this, all of this chunk into this variable here. And that promise is where we're going to make the magic happen. So make server request. Now we're going to call the function then. So inside here, we're going to pass in a function to be run that's going to be resolve. That's going to be set to resolve. It looks a little mind-blowing, but we'll get there. Trust me. So first we need an arrow function. Now, if you look at this example here, you're going to notice, hold on a minute. This doesn't have brackets around it. And you're absolutely right. And that's because of another niche of ES6. If an arrow function has only one parameter, we can just say, have that parameter without the smooth brackets around it. But very important, only if it's one parameter. Okay? Whew. Okay, so make server request then, and then we're going to define a function here, an arrow function that takes one parameter called result, and this is going to be run when resolve gets called here. Okay? Weird. Let's make it work. So add the then method to your promise, which we did. Use result as the parameter of its callback function, which we're doing here. And log result to the console. And here's something very important to bear in mind. Result comes from the argument given to the resolve method. So if everything works, result should be set to, we got the data, this string here. So let's do the last part. Let's console log it. When I tried this before, nothing showed up. And I think there's a bug going on here with console log, because ideally it should show we got the data. But for some reason, it's not working. I don't know why, but I know that this is the way to do it. Sorry, folks. You're going to have to take my word for it. Okay. Handle a fulfilled promise with then. So we fulfilled that for the resolve. Let's run our tests. Yep. 97%. Pat, pat. We did it, folks. Now we're going to do the same with catch. And I'm just going to do that very quick because we're out of time and I want to take us straight into Q&A. Now, if we want to handle the reject in case it fails, we want to do the same thing. Make server request dot catch. And we're going to have an arrow function with one parameter, which can be anything we want. It doesn't have to be result. It doesn't have to be error. Let's go with error. Let's go with error just for the sake of argument. So arrow function, and we will console log error. So what? Oh, make server request. Whoopsie, there's a typo. So there we go. Make server request dot catch error. So what's going to happen here is if the promise is successful, this will get called. If the promise is unsuccessful, this is what gets called. That's the reject up here. So this should, if the console log were working, it should show that data not received is being printed. Phew. So let's run our tests. The world rejoices, folks. We are 100% done with ES6. Pat. We did it. And with that, we will go straight. Hey, you just completed ES6. Congratulations. Become a monthly supporter. If you have the money and can afford it, don't do it if you can't. Cool. We're done. Congratulations, everybody. Now, especially with promises, this is a lot to unpack. So I'm going to spend the next day or so finding resources to go through promises, and we're going to go straight into Q&A. So let's get those questions in. In the meantime, if I don't get to your question today, remember, there's the forum and there's the Discord. Whew. Oh, any homework? Well, actually, yes. I would say go through the promise stuff again. Next week, we'll be starting right away with regular expressions. If you want, feel free to look a little bit ahead in regular expressions, but don't worry, we're going to cover that together. So I would recommend go through promises again. Promises is a lot to unpack. In fact, as Jolene rightly asks here, so the result/reject are like built-in functions. I don't understand how they know to call result/error. Let's go back for a second. Can I do that? Yes. Let me scroll down here. Cool. We will say, hey, promise, do your thing. And then inside the promise, we let the logic happen. And depending on how the promise goes, we'll either call resolve or reject. And these are called callbacks. Whew. Yeah, let's see what else we got for questions. Hope that helps. Rio asks, I got really confused about class. In real life problems, how often do we use class? Is there any simple analogy or use case? Yeah, totally. Let's go back to the vegetables. I like that vegetable exercise. Code block. Where's my class? Class syntax. Classes are another way of making objects. The cool thing is that I like to think of them as either a recipe to make an instance. So you can have one recipe that tells you all the steps you need to make a fantastic banana bread. And then you can make as many banana breads as you want, just saying, hey, make a new banana bread. Or some people like to think of it as a blueprint for a building. So the blueprint will tell you all of the schematics you need in order to say, hey, I want a new building, use the blueprint. And you'll know exactly what steps you need to take, how much concrete and girders and all of that stuff that I know very little about to be able to make your building. It's when you want to make a lot of one thing, it's just a shorthand for saying, hey, make me a new vegetable. Hope that helps. What else we got? Can we use smooth brackets with one parameter hour function, even though it's not required? Yes, you can totally use smooth brackets with one parameter. Absolutely. It's interchangeable. But if you want to remove the smooth brackets, then you'll need to, sorry, if you want to have more than one parameter, then you'll need the smooth brackets. Is class like a template for an object then? Yes, absolutely. Yep, you got it. In the getters and setters, I don't understand why with thermos.temperature equals 26, the result is 26, then the set and should be 28. Let's go back to that. You see, what we're doing is, let me take a look at that getter and setter. What we're doing is saying is we're using the temp variable to say, hey, store Fahrenheit in there. And when somebody calls temperature, it'll call the get function to do that conversion and say, hey, show me it in Celsius. So inside the class, the object knows that it has a Fahrenheit. But when you get or set, it's converting from and to Fahrenheit. Whew. Hope that helps. Did classes/promises not exist before ES6, or did the syntax change? I believe they existed in ES5, which is an older instance of JavaScript. So I think they've just tweaked them a little bit to make them a little bit easier. I will look it up on MDN and we'll find out. Why were the import and export stuff in the ES6 chapter? Were they not in JavaScript before ES6? Again, I think they were there in ES5 and they've been added as time goes on. And I don't know when exactly import and export happened, but since ES6 is the most commonly used modern JavaScript, we're introducing them during this section. Hope this helps. Vinkata asks, is it optional whether to use hashtag or underscore to declare private variables? It is optional. I don't know about using the hashtag, but the underscore is something that we see here in this example. It is optional, but it makes reading it clearer. It is a convention so that when folks are reading the code, they'll say, ah, this is a private variable. Hope this helps. Are private fields and private variables different? I think so. I would say so. Fields are values that are stored on an object, like these properties, and variables are local to one scope. Hope that explains it. Real modules examples. Well, we've seen a couple of them here. You can store a bunch of functions to be able to, for example, manipulate strings in one file, and then you can just keep them inside that module. And then when you're in another file, you need to manipulate a string, you can just import that function and say, aha, here we go. I will just import that one function. Maria asks, are we going to work with using JavaScript together with HTML and CSS during the course? I still don't feel sure about how they work together when you create the UI, apart from DOM manipulation. That's an excellent question. This bootcamp will focus only on the JavaScript language itself. So you might see the occasional, like we saw today, a little bit of like how we can use JavaScript with HTML, but mostly it's going to focus on HTML and CSS. However, if you look at the courses, we've got responsive web design, which you've either done or are doing, or is a web design course offered by my dear friend Jess. This is the one we're doing here, JavaScript algorithms and data structures. And after that, I recommend doing front-end development libraries. And front-end, I haven't looked at it myself in depth yet, but I believe it should cover what you're looking for. And with any luck, maybe I'll do that myself. Cool. Dwayne asks, how long does it take before this class is available to watch on YouTube? I believe it's immediate. If you go on the YouTube channel and you go on like, I think something like finished live streams, it should already be there the moment I end this. Is there another alternative for promises in ES6? I don't know. It could be, but I believe that I would recommend learning promises. I'm gonna see if I can find some resources on maybe, I believe Free Code Camp is going to have an article on that, and I'll post them into the forums and the Discord. Keep an eye out for those. If you're just tuning in, we're doing a bootcamp for learning JavaScript. Is JS classes use public and private for security? Yeah. So the reason we're doing that is, yes, to keep, when you say security, do you mean like secure from like somebody malicious, like somebody who's trying to get data? I don't think so. I think it's so that we don't mess with the internals of a class. So yes, it's kind of for security. Public and private says, hey, use the private stuff from outside the class. And then from inside the class, you can use the private stuff, but keep it inside that class. Hope that makes sense. Sumi asks, can we still start the web design bootcamp? Absolutely. The videos are on YouTube. You will find the link to sign up here, classcentral.com. I would recommend to do one of them at a time. It's a lot of work to do these bootcamps. It's 6 weeks. They're pretty intense. Yeah. Let's see what else we got. In easy words, what is asynchronous JavaScript? Thanks, Brian. I'll try my best. Asynchronous means that you send off something to process in the background, and you keep going with your code keeps going from there. Whereas synchronous means that you send something off to do in the background. No, sorry, not in the background. And the code waits until that response is done. So again, asynchronous, fire off, do stuff in the meantime. Synchronous, fire off, wait for it to be done. Hope that helps. I got time for one more question because I got to run. Johannes asks, async await. Do we touch on that? I think so. Not yet, for sure. But hopefully we will. And if not, more to catch up on. If you're curious about async await, you will find it in the MDN docs, which are displayed here, are a fantastic resource. Yes. So that's my final question for now. I will say this: tomorrow there is no usual lesson. However, if you're interested in Git, we'll be having a guest session tomorrow at the same time. Rizel from GitHub is coming to give us a presentation on an introduction to Git. If you don't know what Git is, if you're curious about Git, if you use Git and you want to get better at it, I highly recommend this presentation tomorrow. We're going to be covering a little bit of Git, a lot of Git, and we're going to get into some real life applications of software development. Git, I'll just give a short blurb on what it is a version control system that is quite often used. All right. So intro to Git tomorrow. On Monday, we will be covering the next session, which is, we're done with ES6. Oh my goodness, congratulations to us. The next is regular expressions. We'll be covering this and we'll just continue from there. So from now, your homework is to take it easy, process everything we've done. I highly recommend playing around more with promises. Okay, so see you tomorrow, hopefully. And if not, I wish you a wonderful rest of your week and all the best. Thanks, everybody, and take care. Bye now.